On the crisp morning of April 3, 1980, 18-year-old Cynthia Cindy Gastel left her family's home in Tacoma Park, Maryland, filled with hope and determination. Armed with a GED and a recently earned cosmetology certificate, Cindy had lined up 2 job interviews in nearby Silver Spring. She dreamed of independence and a future carved out by her own hands. The day felt promising as she boarded the local ride-on bus. But by nightfall, Cindy's hopeful journey turned into a nightmare her family would never escape. When Cindy failed to return home that evening, her parents, Jim and Dorothy Gastel, grew uneasy. It wasn't like Cindy to ignore her family, despite 2 prior runaway attempts during her teenage years. The Gastels hesitated to sound the alarm immediately, reasoning she might return by morning. But as hours stretched into days and Cindy's absence lingered without a word, dread took hold. A call from a local delicatessen confirmed that Cindy had attended at least 1 interview and had even been offered a job. But no one had seen or heard from her since. The family reported her disappearance, but the initial investigation yielded little. Police suspected she might have run away again, given her past. Cindy's family adamantly denied this theory, citing her excitement about the interviews and her plans for the future. As days turned into weeks, the Gastel family's world unraveled. Flyers plastered on street corners were ignored by passers-by. Tips dried up. Cindy's parents and siblings continued their search, their hope dimming with each passing day. They were left with silence, a silence that would span decades. Nearly 2 years later, on February 11, 1982, a hiker traversing Bull Run Mountain in Haymarket, Virginia, approximately 45 miles from Tacoma Park, stumbled upon a chilling discovery. Hidden beneath layers of leaves and debris lay skeletal remains. The area was remote, heavily wooded, and nearly a mile from the nearest road, making the discovery both haunting and puzzling. Prince William County authorities launched an investigation but were hampered by the limited forensic tools of the time. The remains, identified only as a Jane Doe, were too deteriorated to establish a cause of death or any immediate identifiers. With no concrete leads, the case went cold, a nameless victim left without answers or justice. Meanwhile, the Gastels continued their relentless quest for Cindy. Her father, Jim, was periodically summoned to identify unidentified remains across Maryland and Virginia, each instance bringing a cruel cycle of hope and heartbreak. The family ensured Cindy's profile was entered into databases like NamUs and the Doe Network, keeping her case alive in the cold case files. However, Cindy's lack of dental records and the absence of advanced DNA testing stalled progress. Decades passed without closure. In 2001, advances in forensic science offered a glimmer of hope. DNA extracted from the unidentified remains found in 1982 was entered into the national database. 10 years later, the Gastel family's DNA was collected as part of an unrelated investigation. Around the same time, a user on the Web Sleuths forum noted a striking similarity between Cindy's profile and the Jane Doe case. The connection reignited interest in Cindy's disappearance. In July 2011, Tacoma Park Police began comparing the Gastel family's DNA to that of the unidentified remains. Finally, in June 2012, the results confirmed what the family had long feared. Jane Doe was Cynthia Gastel. The confirmation brought bittersweet closure. At a press conference, Cindy's brother, Peter Gastel, spoke on behalf of the family. "We had hoped she would come back. We now know Cindy was taken from us. Our hope is gone, and our hearts are broken again." With the case reclassified as a homicide, detectives worked to unravel the mystery of Cindy's final days. They focused on her boyfriend at the time, a man known only as Michael. Authorities clarified that Michael was not a suspect, but hoped he could provide crucial insights into Cindy's disappearance. However, Michael's whereabouts remained elusive. The most perplexing aspect of Cindy's case was the location where her remains were found. Cindy did not drive, and she had no known connections to Prince William County, let alone the remote Bull Run Mountain. Investigators theorized that she had been transported there by her killer. Whether she was murdered at the site or her body was dumped there afterward remains unknown. As of 2024, the murder of Cynthia Gastel remains unsolved. Forensic technology continues to advance, offering renewed hope that even the oldest cases may one day see justice. Public interest in cold cases has brought fresh eyes to her story, raising awareness of Cindy's life and untimely death. Helen Hill's life was a vivid tapestry of artistry, activism, and love for community. Born on May 9, 1970 in Columbia, South Carolina, Helen's passion for creativity emerged at an early age. Her experiments with animation and storytelling blossomed into a career as one of her generation's most innovative and celebrated experimental filmmakers. With an infectious energy and commitment to social justice, she used her art to connect people and spark conversations about pressing issues. Yet despite her boundless optimism and light, Helen's story took a tragic turn on January 4, 2007 in New Orleans, Louisiana. Helen grew up in a close-knit family in Columbia, South Carolina, where she nurtured her creative talents. After earning her degree at Harvard University, she pursued a Master of Fine Arts at the California Institute of the Arts. There, she refined her skills in experimental animation, producing films that were whimsical yet profound, often hand-painted and deeply personal. Her work, such as the award-winning Scratch and Crow, garnered acclaim for its unique style and emotive storytelling. In the mid-1990s, Helen married Dr. Paul Galiunas, a physician equally dedicated to social causes. The couple relocated to New Orleans, where Helen's artistry and Paul's medical practice became deeply intertwined with the city's vibrant culture. Their home in the Faubourg Marigny neighborhood became a haven for artists, musicians, and activists. Helen's love for New Orleans was evident in her commitment to documenting its beauty and resilience through her films. In 2005, Hurricane Katrina devastated New Orleans. Helen and Paul evacuated to South Carolina with their newborn son, Francis Pop. Despite losing much of their home and possessions, they resolved to return, determined to aid the city's recovery. The couple's resilience was emblematic of their spirit, but New Orleans was still reeling from the hurricane's aftermath, plagued by systemic failures and a rising tide of violence. On January 4, 2007, Helen and Paul's lives were shattered. In the early morning hours, an intruder broke into their home. The family had been asleep when the assailant entered, bringing chaos and violence into their sanctuary. The events that followed are both heart-wrenching and harrowing. Paul, awoken by the commotion, rushed to protect Helen and their 2-year-old son. In the struggle, Paul was shot multiple times but miraculously survived. Helen was fatally shot, succumbing to her injuries at the scene. Their young son Francis was unharmed, shielded by his parents' desperate efforts to protect him. The murder rocked the Faubourg Marigny neighborhood and the wider New Orleans community. Helen's death was one of 6 homicides in a single 24-hour period, underscoring the alarming surge in violence that gripped the city. This spree of killings, which included the murder of musician Dinarel Shavers just days earlier, brought public outcry and demands for systemic change. The Galiunas family's pain was immeasurable. Paul's physical recovery was overshadowed by the emotional devastation of losing Helen. Friends, family, and the artistic community mourned her death, struggling to comprehend the senseless act that claimed her life. Vigils were held in her honor, and tributes poured in from around the world. Despite extensive investigations, Helen's murder remains unsolved. The New Orleans Police Department conducted interviews and pursued leads, but no arrests were made. The case is emblematic of the broader challenges facing the city's justice system during that time, as overburdened law enforcement struggled to address a spike in violent crime. Helen's death left a void, but her legacy endures through her art and the lives she touched. Her final film, The Florestine Collection, was completed posthumously by Paul. The film, which reflects Helen's love for New Orleans and her commitment to preserving its culture, has been praised as a poignant and fitting tribute to her life's work. Helen's influence extended far beyond her films. Her boundless creativity and passion for social justice inspired countless others to use their talents to build bridges and advocate for change. Her murder remains a stark reminder of the violence that still plagues communities and the ongoing need for justice and reform. Who killed Helen Hill? The question looms over her story, a shadow that has yet to be dispelled. Investigators believe the intruder was likely a stranger, a predator exploiting the vulnerabilities of a city in recovery. But without definitive evidence or witnesses, the case has stagnated. For Paul and Helen's family, the lack of resolution is a source of anguish, but they continue to honor her memory by advocating for peace and the arts. Major Benjamin Coxen, known to his friends and foes alike as the Madge, was a man of contradictions. A flamboyant entrepreneur and self-styled civil rights advocate, Coxen moved effortlessly between the highest echelons of society and the shadows of the criminal underworld. His life, filled with wealth, power, and danger, was tragically cut short in a brutal triple homicide that remains unsolved to this day. Born around 1929 in Fairbank, Pennsylvania, Coxen grew up far from the opulence that would later define his life. A natural hustler, he found ways to climb the social ladder, eventually establishing himself as a prominent figure in Philadelphia's African-American community during the 1960s and early 1970s. By then, he was co-owner of the Rolls-Royce Lounge in Center City, Philadelphia, a hotspot frequented by celebrities and power players. He counted among his friends civil rights leader Stanley Branchey and boxing legend Muhammad Ali, with whom he shared a Cherry Hill, New Jersey neighborhood. Coxen wasn't just a businessman, he was a man with ambition. In 1972, he ran for mayor of Camden, New Jersey. Though unsuccessful, his campaign highlighted his larger-than-life persona and connections across social, political, and criminal spheres. While Coxen cultivated the image of a legitimate entrepreneur and community leader, his ties to the underworld were undeniable. Arrested 17 times and convicted 10 times on charges ranging from fraud to larceny, Coxen was a key player in Philadelphia's organized crime scene. Known as a mediator between African-American and Italian-American crime groups, he wielded significant influence in brokering deals, including drug trafficking and money laundering operations. But such a life came with risks. By the early 1970s, tensions in the underworld began to rise. Coxen's flamboyance and perceived invincibility made him a target, especially as he became entangled in a high-stakes heroin deal that would ultimately lead to his demise. On June 8, 1973, the illusion of Coxen's untouchability was shattered. In his Cherry Hill home, Coxen, along with his companion Louise Luby and her daughter Lita, were brutally murdered. The scene was horrifying. Coxen had been bound, gagged, and shot multiple times. Louise and Lita met equally violent ends. The killings bore the hallmarks of an execution, a chilling message from the underworld. Authorities suspected that the Philadelphia Black Mafia orchestrated the murders. At the time, Coxen was believed to be involved in negotiating a major heroin deal between the New York Mafia and local Muslim mobsters. When the deal fell apart, Coxen's failure to deliver may have sealed his fate. Despite the high-profile nature of the case, justice for Coxen and the two women eluded investigators. The brutal killings sent shockwaves through Cherry Hill and beyond, but the criminal underworld's notorious code of silence stifled progress. Witnesses were either too fearful to come forward or unwilling to cooperate, and leads dried up. Coxen's connections to influential figures in both the legitimate and illegitimate worlds further complicated the investigation. Allegations of corruption and reluctance within law enforcement hindered efforts to bring the perpetrators to justice. Over time, the case went cold, leaving behind more questions than answers. Major Coxen's murder marked the violent end of an extraordinary life, but his story didn't fade into obscurity. He became the subject of countless rumors, analyses, and even books, such as John W. King's Citizen Coxen, Life and Death of Major Benjamin Coxen. The book delves into his enigmatic personality and the turbulent world in which he operated, painting a complex picture of a man whose charisma and ambition made him both loved and feared. The unsolved nature of Coxen's murder continues to fascinate true crime enthusiasts and historians. It serves as a grim reminder of the volatile intersection between crime, politics, and power in 20th century America. Who killed Major Coxen, Louise Luby, and Lita? Was it truly the Philadelphia Black Mafia exacting revenge for a failed deal, or were there other players behind the scenes? In the late 1970s, the tranquil streets of Dallas County, Texas, became the hunting ground for a serial killer whose acts were as heinous as they were horrifying. Danny Lee Barber, a man with a troubled past and a dark heart, would ultimately become one of Texas's most chilling killers. Between 1978 and 1980, Barber unleashed a wave of violence that left 4 people dead and an entire community in fear. His crimes, marked by brutality and a disturbing necrophilic element, ended only after his arrest in 1980. But the scars he left behind would never fade. Danny Lee Barber was born on May 8, 1955 in Torrance, California. Little about his early life suggested the horrors he would later commit, but by his early 20s, Barber was leading a life on the fringes of society. It was during this time that his violent tendencies began to surface. His murderous spree began on June 18, 1978, with the killing of Raymond Curley. Though details of this murder remain sparse, it set the stage for the violence to come. Barber escalated his brutality in January 1979 when he targeted Mercedes Mendez. After luring her into a secluded area near Mesquite, Texas, Barber beat her savagely, sexually molested her, and shot her 3 times in the head. Her lifeless body was abandoned in the woods, a grim reminder of the predator now stalking the county. In October 1979, Barber turned his attention to 50-year-old Janice Ingram. Known to her as a laborer who had once worked on her property in Balch Springs, Texas, Barber used this familiarity to gain access to her home. Armed with a piece of pipe, he bludgeoned and stabbed Ingram to death when she began to scream during his intrusion. Her body remained undiscovered for over 2 weeks until her mother and brother made the grisly find on October 26th. Barber's final known victim was Mary Caperton, a 39-year-old woman he murdered on April 21, 1980. Barber later confessed to engaging in sexual acts with the corpses of Mendez and Caperton, a revelation that shocked even the seasoned investigators working the case. Barber's reign of terror ended on May 4, 1980, when he was arrested for breaking into a flea market. What began as a seemingly minor offense unraveled into a full-blown confession to the murders of Ingram, Caperton, Curley, and Mendez. His detailed admissions provided investigators with the evidence needed to charge him, and the chilling nature of his crimes left even seasoned law enforcement shaken. In August 1980, Danny Barber was tried and convicted for the murder of Janice Ingram, receiving a death sentence. He was also handed life sentences for the murders of Mendez and Caperton. The trial revealed the depths of Barber's depravity, painting a picture of a man consumed by violence and perverse desires. His initial execution date was set for January 2, 1988, but appeals and legal technicalities delayed his fate for over a decade. On February 11, 1999, Barber's time ran out. He was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Huntsville, Texas. In his final moments, Barber addressed the family of Janice Ingram, expressing regret for his actions. "I'm regretful for what I done, but I'm a different person from that time," he said in a statement before his execution. While his death brought a measure of closure to the victims' families, the pain of his crimes endures. Barber's story remains a haunting reminder of the horrors humanity is capable of, and the enduring resilience of those left to pick up the pieces. Carroll Edward Cole was a man whose life became a cautionary tale of unchecked trauma and horrifying violence. Over nearly a decade, Cole confessed to killing at least 14 women, claiming his victim count could be as high as 35. His story is one of a troubled childhood, a descent into darkness, and a chilling reign of terror that stretched across the United States. Here, we unravel the life and crimes of one of America's most disturbing serial killers. Born on May 9, 1938 in Sioux City, Iowa, Carroll Cole's early life was marked by pain and neglect. With his father drafted into World War II, Cole was left in the care of his mother, who was both emotionally and physically abusive. She humiliated him, punished him for expressing his emotions, and used him as a pawn to conceal her extramarital affairs. These experiences sowed the seeds of a deep hatred for women, especially those he perceived as promiscuous. The violence that would later define Cole's life emerged shockingly early. At the age of 8, he drowned a classmate in a fit of rage. Though his actions were ruled accidental, it was a sign of the darkness within him. Over time, his violent tendencies grew more pronounced, though they remained hidden for many years. As an adult, Cole's life spiraled further into chaos. He became a transient, moving frequently and taking on odd jobs. This lifestyle allowed him to evade suspicion while committing his heinous acts. His targets were often women who reminded him of his mother, those he met in bars who seemed vulnerable or exhibited behaviors he deemed immoral. Cole's modus operandi was chilling. He would lure his victims into a false sense of security, often by appearing charming or offering companionship. Once alone with them, he would strangle them, sometimes engaging in necrophilia afterward. In some instances, he even resorted to cannibalism. His crimes were brutal and deeply personal, driven by a need to exert power and vengeance over the women he loathed. Between 1971 and 1980, Cole's killing spree stretched across states including California, Nevada, and Texas. His first confirmed murder occurred in 1971, though it would take years for authorities to connect the dots. Cole's transient lifestyle and his habit of targeting strangers made him a difficult suspect to track. One of his most infamous murders occurred in Las Vegas, where he strangled a woman he had met in a bar. Her body, discarded like garbage, became another unsolved case in a growing list of tragedies linked to Cole. As the years passed, Cole's confidence grew, and so did his victim count. Cole's reign of terror came to an end on November 30, 1980, when he was arrested for an unrelated charge. During his incarceration, he shocked investigators by confessing to multiple murders. He provided detailed accounts of his crimes, matching unsolved cases across the country. Each confession painted a horrifying picture of a man consumed by rage and a twisted sense of justice. In 1984, Cole was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death in Nevada. Remarkably, he waived his appeals, expressing a desire to face the consequences of his actions. In interviews, Cole displayed moments of self-awareness, acknowledging the depth of his depravity and his lack of remorse. On December 6, 1985, Carroll Cole was executed by lethal injection at the Nevada State Prison. His execution brought an end to one of America's most chilling serial killer cases. In his final days, Cole offered insights into his motivations, blaming his abusive childhood and the unresolved anger he harbored toward his mother. Cole's case has since become a focal point for studies on the impact of childhood trauma and its potential role in shaping violent tendencies. It is a reminder of the devastating consequences of untreated psychological wounds and the horrors that can result when they manifest unchecked. Carroll Edward Cole's story is a grim reminder of the monsters that can lurk beneath the surface. His life and crimes left a trail of devastation, claiming the lives of innocent women and leaving their families to grapple with unimaginable grief. While his execution brought some measure of justice, the scars he left behind remain a stark testament to the darkness within the human psyche. The summer of 1979 marked the beginning of a series of heinous murders that sent shockwaves through Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Over a span of less than a year, David Allen Van Dyke carried out a brutal killing spree that left 6 people dead and a community grappling with fear. Behind his cold demeanor and troubled upbringing lay a violent predator whose crimes would etch his name into the annals of true crime infamy. David Van Dyke was born on January 14, 1959 in Milwaukee. His childhood was shaped by instability and trauma. When Van Dyke was 6, his grandmother, a stabilizing presence in his life, passed away. From then on, he lived with his mother, who struggled to manage his increasingly troubling behavior. By the time he was a teenager, Van Dyke had displayed alarming tendencies, including an incident in which he strangled a pet canary while laughing. These early signs of psychopathy went unaddressed. School was another source of difficulty for Van Dyke. He dropped out after the 7th grade, unable to cope with academic or social demands. Without an education or steady job prospects, he turned to petty crime, resorting to burglary and hustling to survive. His descent into darkness had begun, though no one could have anticipated the horrors to come. Between July 1979 and April 1980, Van Dyke carried out a series of murders, each one more brutal than the last. His victims were diverse, ranging in age, race, and gender. This lack of a specific profile made his crimes even more chilling. Van Dyke's method was often the same. He would gain entry to his victims' homes under false pretenses, such as asking to use the phone or bathroom. Once inside, he unleashed unimaginable violence. On July 19, 1979, the body of 69-year-old Della Mae Liggins was discovered in her Milwaukee home. She had been stabbed multiple times. Liggins was a widow who lived alone, making her an easy target for Van Dyke's predatory instincts. Her murder marked the beginning of his killing spree. Less than a month later, 78-year-old Florence Burkhardt was found dead in her home on August 10, 1979. She had been stabbed 43 times with a pair of scissors. The level of overkill shocked investigators, indicating a deep-seated rage in the perpetrator. Burkhardt's quiet life and advanced age made the brutality of her death even more senseless. The killing spree continued on November 9, 1979, when Helen Hill, 79, was discovered beaten to death in her home. The scene was gruesome. Hill had been bludgeoned repeatedly, and the crime bore hallmarks of Van Dyke's previous murders. By this time, authorities suspected a serial killer might be at work, though they lacked the evidence to identify him. On January 25, 1980, Van Dyke attacked 63-year-old Charles Golston. Using a claw hammer, he bludgeoned Golston in a vicious assault. Golston survived the initial attack but succumbed to his injuries months later in May 1980. This marked Van Dyke's only known male victim, underscoring the randomness of his targets. Van Dyke's 5th known victim was Bernard Fonder, 49, who was found dead on March 3, 1980. He had suffered severe head injuries, another signature of Van Dyke's escalating violence. Van Dyke's final known victim remains unidentified, but the pattern of his crimes was unmistakable. A predatory reliance on trust, followed by unspeakable violence and theft. Each murder left a community reeling and police struggling to find leads. Van Dyke's downfall began with his arrest on May 23, 1980 for an attempted burglary. It seemed like a minor offense at first, but investigators soon connected his fingerprints to multiple crime scenes. Under interrogation, Van Dyke confessed to 6 murders, often breaking down in tears. He offered chilling details about each crime, painting a picture of a man driven by rage and a twisted sense of entitlement. In 1981, Van Dyke stood trial for multiple counts of first-degree murder. His defense team attempted to argue diminished capacity, citing his traumatic childhood and mental health issues. However, the jury was unswayed by these arguments. The overwhelming evidence, including his confessions and forensic links, led to his conviction. Van Dyke was sentenced to 6 life terms for the murders, along with an additional 40 years for related crimes. He remains incarcerated at the Walpin Correctional Institution, a maximum security facility in Wisconsin. Van Dyke's case has been studied extensively by criminologists and psychologists, seeking to understand the roots of his violence. His early signs of psychopathy, combined with a lack of intervention and a chaotic upbringing, created a perfect storm for his later crimes. Experts have noted his ability to manipulate and deceive his victims, traits common among serial predators. The crimes of David Van Dyke left a permanent scar on Milwaukee.